Good evening, viewers, and welcome to this edition of Energy This Week. I'm Ademola Adedoyin. As promised last week, we are continuing the Petroleum Industry Bill edition this evening. In this second part, many controversial clauses of the bill are dissected by our guest, the petroleum law expert, Dr. Adeoye Adefulu. But before then, sit back to watch our report on events, activities, and development in the industry during the week.
One day, we had a vision to improve the way people access their fuel products. Now, 1 in 5 cars drives on our fuel. But that was not enough. So we pioneered the provision of cleaner, safer fuel to local industries through the fastest growing gas supply network in sub-Saharan Africa. Still, that was not enough. So we invested in the acquisition of rigs for oil and gas exploration. We strive towards our future when we, a proudly Nigerian company, will offer the complete solution to Nigeria's energy needs. Owando, the future is here.
Good evening, viewers. Welcome to News of the Week. My name is Azizat Sani. First, the headlines. Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation frets over United States shale oil discovery. Oil-producing communities urge federal government to pay 13% fund to them. Nigerian Petroleum Development Company, now biggest indigenous gas supplier. Now the details. The discovery of shale oil by the United States to meet its domestic crude oil needs may adversely affect Nigeria's revenue. As a result, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation has expressed fears, saying the United States might go into territories currently being served by Nigeria's oil after satisfying its local crude oil needs. Speaking on the implications of the development, the General Manager Media Relations Department, Group Public Affairs Division, NNPC, Dr. Omar Farouk, said that it posed a great concern not just to Nigeria, but also to other African nations exporting crude oil. Oil-producing communities in Ondo State at the weekend called on the federal government to set up a national administrative board to handle direct disbursement of the 13% oil mineral derivation fund accruable to oil-bearing communities in the country. The board, according to the communities, would put an end to the current system whereby funds are released through the state government agencies. The community's request was part of the 6-point communique issued after a meeting with stakeholders, comprising mainly women and youth groups who represent the oil communities in the states under the aegis of the State Chapter of Oil and Gas Producing Communities of Nigeria, OGPCN, held in Okitepukpa, Ondo State. The communities said that the board became necessary due to the alleged failure of the state government to remit the statutory fund to the communities for their human and physical development as provided by the Nigerian 1999 Constitution. The Nigerian Petroleum Development Company, NPDC, is now the biggest local producer of gas in the country. Group Managing Director of the NNPC, Engineer Andrew Yakubu, has said. This development has gone a long way in meeting the federal government's aspiration in area of power generation. Adding the new status now makes NPDC the biggest indigenous gas supplier in Africa. Yakubu stated this over the weekend after the board meeting of the NNPC-NPDC in Warri Delta State. He said the corporation, along with its flagship company, NPDC, is repositioning to ensure that its acquired assets remain productive to ultimately boost the revenue inflow of the Nigerian economy. According to Engineer Yakubu, with the divestment of Shell, NPDC is the top and the only option for indigenous participation that will replace companies like SPDC and other companies wanting to divest their equities. NPDC, therefore, has taken over this obligation of value addition as the flagship operator of the upstream business of NNPC. That's all for the news of the week. Thanks for watching. Join us again next week. I am Azizat Sani.
The Petroleum Industry Bill, by now, has earned the unenviable distinction as the most delayed piece of legislation in post-independent Nigeria. First drafted in April 2000 by the Rewano Lukman-led Oil and Gas Reforms Implementation Committee, the Petroleum Industry Bill, currently under consideration for passage into law by the 7th National Assembly, has received so much tinkering and battering in the last 13 years, but like the proverbial cat with 9 lives, has survived all onslaught. The bill, which seeks to bring all the existing laws, enactment and decrees guiding operations in the oil sector under a single legislation, has no doubt emerged as the most ambitious bill, if not the most controversial, to be sent by the executive to the legislature since the advent of democratic government in 1999. Although its first draft was done in 2000, it was not until 2008 that it was first presented to the 6th National Assembly. However, efforts to pass it by that assembly were scourged by high-wire politics and legislative bickering. It was left in the cooler until January 2012, following the mass protest that greeted the government's attempt to hike price of fuel and the government's sweeping reforms of the sector that took place in the wake of that national protest. In January 17, 2012, the federal government set up a PIB technical committee led by Senator Udo Udoma. The job of the committee was to review the 2009 version of the bill. The final work of the Udo Udoma-led technical committee had about 16 pieces of petroleum legislations repealed, while all the other laws were aggregated into a single piece of comprehensive legislation. The revised bill was forwarded to the National Assembly by the Honorable Minister of Petroleum Resources, Mrs. Diezani Alison Madueke, on July 18, 2012, for consideration and passage into law. 11 months and many legislative bickering later, the bill is still under consideration for passage by the lawmakers in the 2 houses. A major plank of the bill is the establishment of a fiscal framework that encourages investment and increased revenue inflow to the government. Maintaining this delicate balance is what appears to have given the bill its biggest headache. The bill provides for the payment of company income tax at 30% by all companies engaged in upstream petroleum operations, and another Nigerian hydrocarbon tax at either 50% for onshore and shallow areas of no more than 200 meters depth, or 25% for bitumen, frontier acreage, or deep-water areas. On the whole, the total government take in joint venture operations went up a notch higher by 1% from the current 87% to 88%. As far as international oil companies are concerned, the bill is not only investment unfriendly, it is a piece of legislation that will set the existing work program back and by implication work against the nation's interest. They are equally ill at ease with such fiscal regime change as the proposed replacement of investment tax allowance with production-based incentive. But there are strong voices supporting the fiscal regime put in place in the bill, saying that the IOCs are only being self-centered and concerned with huge profits at the expense of the nation. This school of thought argues that the provision for the minister to prescribe royalties, fees and rentals payable by the oil companies is not new, as it has always been in the Nigerian law. Furthermore, it was argued that the proposed government take, placed at 70% at the end, is lower than the 76% of government takes according to the current Angola fiscal terms. Other countries such as Saudi Arabia and Libya all have higher percentage of government take in the fiscal terms. The PIB, however, is not all about fiscal regime and tax controversy. For instance, the bill sets out to unbundle the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, the NNPC, and form a national oil company that the private sector players can invest in and grow into a global brand such as Petrobras of Brazil and Petronas of Malaysia. In the downstream sector, while the bill seeks to put an end to the regime of fuel subsidy and enthrone deregulation, it also seeks to put in place the Petroleum Equalization Fund to provide the fund needed for ensuring fuel price uniformity across the country. Analysts feel the idea of PEF contradicts the spirit of deregulation regime in which market forces should ordinarily determine price. With the PIB, will the subsidy regime end? That is the billion-naira question. Another major feature of the PIB is the provision for the remittance on a monthly basis 10% of the upstream petroleum company's net profit to host community fund. The fund generated is set aside to develop oil-producing communities. It is perhaps the most contentious provision on the bill as it has divided the nations along regional lines. Both sources hinted that the National Assembly is negotiating and working at resolving the controversy generated by the provision. Overall, the PIB remains the boldest move to comprehensively address all the issues in the oil industry and put in place a legislation that reflects contemporary realities. It may not be a perfect piece of legislation, but a great step forward has been taken. For the industry, things can only get better once the National Assembly gives its final nod and Mr. President, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, signs it into law.
Okay, Dr. Defulu, let us look at government take on PIB. It is put at an average of 70%, and the contention there is that this is just okay, and that if you look at other oil-producing countries and all that, Angola, for instance, is 76, and other countries, Saudi Arabia and others, are even higher. Now, will you say, because the essence of PIB really is to encourage investment and at the same time deepen government earnings. So will you say the government take is okay either which way? Is it that it's low or is high?
Okay, I'm going to hedge and not stick to the numbers. I've heard different versions of what the government take is, and actually I haven't heard 70%. I've heard much higher figures than that. But I think the important thing around the government take is this. One, we're in a very competitive industry. As a nation, we are competing against some of our neighbors, some of those countries I've mentioned. We are also, when you are competing, you don't just look at the tax or the fiscal numbers, overall fiscal numbers. You need to look at the environment as well. Nigeria has improved significantly in terms of the problems that we had in the Niger Delta. But some of those problems with illegal bunkering is still there. I know we're working at it. Oil theft is still there. Those challenges, you need to program those challenges and those issues into the context of the government take, and questions around whether that is high compared to another country. So you don't take the country's figures in isolation. The environment has to work, has to be worked into those figures.
Yeah, Dr. Defulu, we're looking at government take, and we are saying that NNPC came out officially to say that it is 70%, and it also goes further to compare that figure with what obtains in other oil-producing countries. For it cites a place like Angola, which has 76%, other countries like Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth, Libya, and all those figures. So what we are saying, what I was asking is, this government take, will you say it's capable of ensuring investment? Does it look like what we need to take in order to ensure that while we deepen our earnings, it does not discourage investment?
The comparison question is actually very important. We've talked about different competing jurisdictions. We've talked about the fact that oil has been discovered in different parts of Africa, etc. But it's not just an absolute numbers game. So again, the figures of 70% and 76%, I'm not necessarily an expert to say that those are the actual figures. I mean, I've heard various other figures. But the issue is not just about the absolute numbers. The question is also about the environment. You need to ask yourself that, have we factored some of those difficult issues? Have they been factored into the equation? So we've had the challenge around oil theft, illegal bunkering. We've had that challenge. We've had some of the challenges which have eased, I must say, around the Niger Delta area. But all those things have to be factored in to be able to know whether a true comparison has been made of the figures. And perception is also important. Yeah. Global perception. Whilst we say, things have gone better, and we know that from fact, because of the historical challenges, some of those things will be important in the analysis that international oil companies will take into consideration in determining whether Nigeria is the appropriate environment to invest in.
Okay. Let's look at gas in under PIB. There are penalties that have been put in place for gas flaring, and the penalties to be paid and all of that. And there is also supposed to be a flare out date when there will be no more flaring again and all of that. But of course, again, the minister is given the sweeping powers to determine when that flare out date will be. Do you think with such powers and all that, the PIB is actually serious about putting an end to gas flaring?
The issue of gas flaring is very, very important. The impact that it has on the people that are in that environment, health impact, even the psychological impact, really, when you have flares going off all the time. I think that is very, very important. I think that the international companies, NNPC, all these companies that are producing in that region need to really pay attention to the issue of gas flaring. But I think it's important to also give a context. One of the difficulties with the Nigerian oil and gas industry is because we have very many small fields, a lot of these fields in which you have oil associated with gas. And producing oil, developing and producing oil is fairly easy. And storage of oil is also very easy. It's much more difficult to
Produce gas.
To produce, it's not actually the production of gas, it's actually gathering the gas, putting it together, and finding a market for the gas. Now, Nigeria is working very, very hard with the gas master plan, etc., working very hard on developing a market for gas. But with the level of production of oil and the gas that is associated with oil, we may not have found a sufficient market. And we certainly don't have the infrastructure at the moment.
Infrastructure is the key word here.
Yes. So it then comes back to the question, what are the priorities for the government? As a major investor, as a 60%, between 55 to 60% holder in the joint venture, the government has a key role in ensuring or bringing gas flare out to an end. That role is a commercial role, but also as a regulator, as a policy maker, it's really within the hands of the government. The question is, what trade-offs do you have to make, and how important is revenue to those trade-offs that you have to make? It's a question for the government to answer.
It's. I think it's something to brainstorm over too, because with a huge deficit in infrastructure and the sinking market, okay, what you're looking at is a situation where harnessing the gas may not be as attractive as it ordinarily should be.
Yes.
So, given this scenario, and we do not want to violate our environment, we want to make sure we go green and all of that. How do we now reconcile all of this and ensure that the producing companies, in spite of all these limitations, are encouraged to continue to harness the gas and not flare?
Gas pricing, I think that's the key question. Right now, the gas prices are regulated. It's much better than it was before, but at the moment, gas pricing may not necessarily reflect the commercial realities. If you're going to make an investment in building pipelines, creating a network, putting gas gathering facilities in place, etc., you want to be sure that whatever the commercial cost of the gas is, you're going to get paid that cost. And right now, for the main sector that takes gas, the price is regulated. That's the power sector. So we need to look at, I think regulation is important because you don't want a situation also where the gas pricing is very, very expensive. It doesn't encourage. Well, at the end of the day, the consumer, you and I that buy electric power, have to bear that cost. You don't want a situation where there's a tariff shock on the consumers, but you want the oil producing companies to meet their costs and to achieve a reasonable rate of return.
A major feature of the PIB is the provision for the remittance of monthly basis 10% of the net profit, adjusted profit less NHT and CIT, to host community fund. The contention has been that this fund has generated some controversy. Some people feel strongly that with NDDC, with derivation to oil-producing states and all that asking for another fund is taking it too far. How do you assess this?
When the initial draft of the Petroleum Industry Bill was sent to the National Assembly, the fund was not one of the issues that was introduced. But subsequently, I believe that the debate centered around what were the communities going to really benefit from this change or this reform. And it has now been introduced to much controversy because I know that the first and second readings in the National Assembly was really very difficult, and some of the issues around the PHCF is why that was difficult. I think one of the things that you need to ask is how do we make sure that the communities actually derive some benefit from the oil and gas that is found within their region. Some countries have treated it very differently, making sure that funds are created that the members of the community can hold in trust, and some of these funds, for example, allow that the communities can essentially award those monies to themselves. They can use it for infrastructure development. They can use it to award scholarships, etc. The question that I ask is whether those funds should be separate from the other funds that are already being made available to the oil producing states. I think that's really where the political debate around this issue has centered. Not necessarily as to whether the communities should gain these monies. That's where the debate has centered. For me, I think that the important thing is that communities must be actively involved in determination of where whatever benefits that have accrued to them, determination of where those benefits should be spent.
Talking about the host community fund, what people have actually talked about is the fact that some of these agencies and parastatals and commissions, they appear to be duplicating rules and all that. You have the Ministry of Niger Delta, you have NDDC, we talk about derivation formula, now we are talking about host community fund. Can't we find a way through the bill that all those agencies and all that will be restructured, so that in the final analysis, it is easier to have a well-structured agency or commission to attend to the needs of the people of oil-producing states?
It's very important that any duplication of roles is actually comes to an end. I think the efficiency of the way in which government money is spent in this area is very, very important. I think that the Petroleum Industry Bill would be the wrong place to address this. Many things have been added and tacked on to the Petroleum Industry Bill since the bill was put in place, and it can be the cause of significant political debate. I would suggest that this kind of issue, given the fact that there is an NDDC Act, given the fact that the Ministry of Niger Delta was created by executive action, those things the duplication of functions between the two of them can really be addressed through a clear policy line from the executive arm of the government as to what the Ministry of Niger Delta should be doing as opposed to what the NDDC should be doing. Now, in relation to the Petroleum Host Community Fund, NDDC, Ministry of Niger Delta, these are controlled by the federal government. They are federal government entities. I think that with the host community fund, or funds rather, those should be led by the people, or by the community, really. If such a fund is to be established, the benefit or otherwise of that fund will be that the community is involved as stakeholders around what that fund should do and how that fund should benefit their own community, and not just what the central government wants for them.
Let's go to the downstream sector. Now, the key element of government's deregulation policy is deregulation. I mean, there has been a lot of efforts in that direction, and government has not backed off. But when you look at PIB, you are talking of stopping subsidy, for instance, in one breath, and in another, you are talking of the Petroleum Equalization Fund, which will be a fund that is put in place to ensure price uniformity across the country. What that implies, in essence, is that you're still going to have a situation where government will be paying one form of subsidy or the other. Does this not look contradictory? I mean, if you want to go deregulation, let's go the whole hog. Let PIB state it without any ambiguity. But to now say in one breath that we're having a subsidy and there's still going to be PEF to bring money for price uniformity, does that not contradict the aim of what deregulation is all about?
I believe so. I mean, we used to, price uniformity has been very important. It's something that we've used as a tool for several years. The electricity industry as well. But now that has come to an end in the electricity industry. We expect it. We expected it to come to an end in the oil and gas industry as well. But the challenge around the petroleum industry bill is that you have policy and you have politics. In order to get the bill passed, there are certain concessions that will have to be made. And my analysis from outside is that the PEF is one of those concessions. So whilst deregulation is to go ahead, the PEF is a concession that has to be made in order to get the bill passed.
Thanks so much, Dr. Adefulu, for taking our time to be with us today. You can be sure that we want you to come over here again once we want to deal with issues such as this. We sincerely appreciate your time and your contributions here today. Thanks so much.
Let me thank you for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you. Viewers, we are sure you have followed and enjoyed this session in great measure. By now, we are not in doubt that you are better informed and educated about the petroleum industry bill. For your views on this issue, you can reach us on info@energythisweek.tv. Log on to our website, energythisweek.tv, for a full version of the interview. Till I come your way next week, I remain yours sincerely, Ademola Adedoyin. Bye for now.